Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. If you have a degree in STEM, you are future-proof. So says the Honorable Dr. David Honey, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering with the United States Department of Defense. We had an awesome, phenomenal conversation about artificial intelligence, about quantum science, about quantum physics, biotechnology, and what does the Department of Defense look for in an engineering candidate. Dr. Honey, thank you so much for taking some time for us on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for the chance to be here today.
Now, I've learned a little bit about your background, which is fascinating, and I'm always just kind of naturally curious about how people with really cool jobs find their way into that role, and your story is certainly no exception to that. So you've got a great career, a great background as both an engineer and a scientist. So I'd love to hear about some of your experiences along the way, and then how you managed to rise to the position that you're in today.
One thing is, how did I get involved in STEM? Why STEM? What was it that was a big motivation? And I grew up in the 60s, and that was a time of what today we would call a great power competition. Back then we called it the Cold War.
Right.
And the other big thing that was going on was the space race. Yep. And I've tried to describe to my kids what was it like at that time when every space launch was a national event. Schools came to a stop, businesses came to a stop. Everybody paused to watch the launch because it was of that importance to the nation. And so I think that was probably the time period when STEM and what it could offer the country at the national level really entered the consciousness of our nation. I think, the World War II generation coming out of World War II, seeing radar, atomic weapons, atomic energy, airliners and things like that, had an appreciation for it. But it was really that time in the 60s, I think, that the country as a whole really became to understand the importance. So there was a lot of support at that time for kids that wanted to go into STEM and a lot of opportunity and whatnot. And so in college, I got offered a summer job. Today we would call it a summer internship, but it didn't exactly exist back then. But I went to work for the national security community. This is the 49th anniversary of my security clearance. My first.
Wow, awesome.
So
I love
I'm doing it for a while now. But, I got an early view into the national security challenges at the national level. Partway through graduate school, I took a break and went and joined the Air Force and went to pilot training, and then I spent 10 years as an Air Force pilot in the B-52 and the FB-111, then went back to graduate school to pick it up. I would tell people in my research group, don't do what I did. You don't want to be 40 years old and completing your PhD, but that's what I did. And so, it was great. I had the opportunity for a true dual track career in the Air Force, to be a pilot and then to be a scientist, with my last assignment ending up at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which I had told my wife when we got there in 97, it would only be a 2-year gig and that would be it. And there's no jobs in the DC area, so we had to leave. And I ended up staying at DARPA for 10 years and 2 years as an Air Force officer, 8 as a civilian, and then off to industry. And I thought I would never be coming back to government. That was it. I was done. It was off to industry. To take there what I'd learned. And then 2 years in, I got while I was in industry, I got offered something that was never even on my radar screen, which was a political appointment. So I came into the Pentagon to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research, and then moved back over to the intelligence community, doing similar things there. And it just, has rolled on and on and on. I've never been able to predict what was going to happen. But as it turns out, in each of the jobs you're in, you're preparing for the next one, whether you realize it or not. And so just about the time that I thought maybe it's time to really retire, the Honorable Heidi Shue became the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And she said to me, nope, not time to retire. If I'm going to the Pentagon, you're coming with me. And so
awesome.
So I came back to the Pentagon for this tour as the DoD, which is great.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, we could go a million different directions on almost every element of that answer. Certainly, I grew up a little bit after the space race, but I will still argue that one of the greatest speeches I've ever heard was John F. Kennedy's call to the nation to to put a man on the moon, and of course that iconic line of doing things because they're hard and not easy. It's become a mantra of my life. 49 years of security clearance. I'm sure the things that are in your head are absolutely fascinating. And in your time at DARPA, I've always been fascinated by what a career there might be like, and being responsible for all these private research projects that are going on behalf of the federal government. I think that'd be fascinating as well. In as much as every one of those could be it's a podcast episode on its own. Let's focus a little bit on your current office, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. What does a typical day look like? What kind of work are you doing?
So, R&E is the CTO for the department. And in many ways, it resembles, to me anyway, the typical CTO function that you find in any corporation or any organization, where all of the various C-suite execs and C-suite specialties, they each have their own function, but there's times that they're going to have to come together to make a decision on a major issue for the organization. And it can be a personnel issue, it can be an operational issue, it can be an investment issue. There's, these things. And so the C-suite executives come together, and quite often, especially today, there's a technology element of that issue that needs to be explored and explained so that all of the executives can reach a consensus level of decision on what is the best thing to go forward with, or at least advise the CEO or the leader what the options are so that the best decision can be made. So for a lot of what we do is preparing for these various meetings and issues where there's going to be, a big debate, a lot of exploration of the various angles and whatnot. And we're there to provide the technological advice, the S&T advice to everybody else so they can understand the issue from that perspective. But more than that, we also have the responsibility, and this is what comes with being a political appointee. For all my time as a career civil servant or military officer, I was focused on mission, execution, and operations. What I was never focused on was policy and strategy. And when you move into a political appointment, that's the thing that becomes a clear delineator versus the other activities. And that's what we spend an awful lot of time on in our office as well.
Has to be just a fascinating job to do. And, number one, you think about how quickly technology is advancing today. We talk a lot on our podcast about the exponential economy, Moore's law, products doubling in price performance every 12 to 18 months. I've got to believe that as you look back over those 49 years, the point in time when you're in your current position is really poignant in a lot of ways, to look at how quickly technology is advancing, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's machine learning, whether it's new defense technologies and so on, and to be right on the cutting edge of understanding those and explaining them to others. That's really certainly a huge responsibility, and also a really interesting point in time to be doing that work. As you look back over this 49 years of security clearance and these many years of serving the United States of America, Dr. Honey, can you pull out a specific project that you think was maybe the most challenging of your career?
There have been a lot that were challenging. It's not unusual, especially in the national security arena, to want to reach farther than S&T can deliver today. And so in some cases, you're going to be inspiring work that will get done to get there. But I would say one of the most challenging projects I've worked on is one I'm working on right now. That is the work that we have going on in support of the CHIPS and Science Act. So it's a big national level effort. It's in the news quite a bit. It's a gigantic interagency enterprise. And by that, I mean, across the government, all of these different parts of the government are coming together to work it. It took a great collaboration between the executive branch and the legislative branch to get the authorities and the budget that we need to do it. And now today, Department of Commerce, NIST, NSF, DoD, Treasury, OMB, we're all coming together to work through this and collaborate and make this a success for the country. I think that, operationally, that's a challenge, but the technologies that we're going after are also going to be very challenging and create great opportunities. We were very fortunate that we were given a particular slice of that activity called the Microelectronics Commons, which we're moving out on, and we're making a lot of progress on, and we'll have news releases on that coming up in the next couple of months of where we are in making awards and whatnot. But looking through what's going on in that, I feel very excited that we're going to see a number of technologies created in, I think, even new industries that we can't envision today. So I think we'll see some great success out of that.
It's an incredibly exciting time. We've had both Senator Todd Young of Indiana, who co-sponsored that act through the U.S. Senate, as you know, alongside Chuck Schumer, and just recently Congressman Frank Lucas from Oklahoma, who, of course, chairs the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I'm sure a lot of the work that you're doing certainly overlaps and aligns with the work that's going on in that branch of our national Congress. And so I'm absolutely fascinated as well by the Chips and Science Act, and love the innovation that I think is going to come out of that as we take the entire U.S. government and focus it on what is collectively a technology issue. It's an innovation issue. Certainly a national security issue as we look at where most of that technology is coming from, or a lot of it is today. So exciting time to be involved in the Chips and Science Act and the implementation of that legislation. How about a really, really fascinating project in addition to that one that you've been involved with, or a really interesting one that our audience might be interested in hearing about?
So I would say that for me personally, one of the most interesting projects that I've ever been associated with were the first two DARPA Grand Challenges that occurred back in 2004, 2005. I was there for both of them. I saw the project. I saw the very idea for the project get proposed. I thought it was insane that anybody would even think of doing something like that. And watching the team that led it bring it all together was just incredible. But what was really impressive to me was, all of these participants who were not receiving funding all came forward to do it. And in 2004, when we showed up, none of them got very far at all.
Yeah.
And what was amazing to me was that was in March of 2004. So in October of 2005, we hadn't planned to do a second one. But Dr. Tether, recognizing that maybe the community could come together and solve the problem, doubled the prize and put it back out there. And what was amazing to me was 18 months later, the physical hardware didn't change that much, but the entire community's understanding of artificial intelligence, decision-making, systems integration, systems engineering made this tremendous leap forward across the entire community. And in the second one, 5 vehicles completed the race. There were a number of other vehicles that would have completed the race, but they had a flat tire, or they left the course accidentally as there was a safety issue or whatever. What was just incredible to me was to see how AI, the entire community, advanced from just that one challenge problem and what they did over 18 months. Because again, the hardware didn't change that much, but people's understanding of how to use AI in that context just dramatically stepped forward.
And just to expound on what you said, I mean, we're going back to, you said 2004. I mean, that range, so almost 20 years ago, in the application of AI, and in as much as, I mean, that's just exploded, the technology and the discussions around AI over the course of the last several months. I heard a statistic a week or two ago that it took ChatGPT 2 months to get to 100 million users. I'm sure you're familiar with that statistic. Two months. It took the smartphone 16 years. It took the telephone book 75 years to get to 100 million users. And so that technology is moving incredibly fast. And most people are, if not, conversant on it, at least have some idea of what AI is. You're talking about 20 years ago that you were talking about artificial intelligence and implementing that technology. Do I have that right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating, and to think where it is now and where it's going. I mean, I'm actually an optimist about artificial intelligence technology. I think a lot of people are scared about it, maybe because they don't understand it. I think the problems that it's going to solve and the improvements in our way of life that are available to us if we harness it, use it the right way, and use it for good are really, really exciting, and I'm really optimistic about that. The other thing that I'm optimistic about is the future of engineering opportunities and STEM opportunities. I spent 23 years of my career in advanced manufacturing, saw people's lives fundamentally changed by careers in that space. So we actually got interested in inviting you onto the podcast, Dr. Honey, in February during National Engineers Week, and you were featured in just a phenomenal video about STEM opportunities at the Department of Defense. So the number that I heard was 100,000 engineers that are employed at the DoD and different sectors of the DoD. So talk a little bit about that, and talk a little bit about career opportunities for people interested in entering the defense world as an engineer.
Historically, the Department of Defense, or the military components of the United States, have actually been very technology focused. In fact, if you look back to World War II, for example, relative to population size, we actually have the smallest standing army in Europe. And for us, because of the fact that these conflicts take place away from our shores, getting people, getting soldiers, getting equipment there is difficult. And so we've always had this motivation to think from a tech standpoint, what can we do to make the situation better for our warfighters? That goes back for a long ways. So the appreciation within DoD for STEM and the need for STEM, it's been there for a very, very long time. And so the opportunity to come in and be able to work on challenging problems is historic within the department. I mean, we've always been on the leading edge. All of our weapon systems, all the things that we do, all the things that we try, we have to invent the S&T as we go along. We've got to translate that then into engineering handbooks and engineering resources to actually make things work. And so, people that come into the department have great opportunity to do those things. One of the things I would say, though, is that the department has for a long time recognized its roles and responsibilities in helping to create that workforce. And so as a result, our commitment to STEM education goes all the way from K through 12, undergraduate, graduate, support for university professors. It's a very rich set of opportunities that we have within the department to not only perform engineering, but to get trained as an engineer. And then we also invest in our workforce once they're here to get those skills upgraded as time goes along. Because as you mentioned, technology advances and we have to be prepared for that.
Absolutely. I love the focus on, we almost call it K to gray in terms of how we get people excited about STEM careers. It's we've got to get young people excited about technology, as early as K, K5 and in that range, and especially in middle school as young people and particularly girls will start turning off to certain career pathways, getting them excited about these technologies really, really important. So the whole idea that you're focusing on from that kindergartner all the way to that high-end research scientist at the university level and everything in between is absolutely fascinating. For those individuals that get inspired toward those careers, Dr. Honey, and have an interest in a career with the Department of Defense, talk about the breadth of STEM careers that are available to them once they get there.
Today, I think there's an increased recognition that there isn't any area of STEM that is not important to us. Now, to try and help people manage their careers, manage their resources, and understand where the opportunities are in DoD, we try and aggregate those interests. And so we recently published our list of 14 critical technology areas, and those are available on our website at cto.mil. And I encourage everybody to take a look there. It's got a lot of resources and whatnot. But one thing that I would point out is that, people look at that and they'll say, well, I don't see math listed as one of the areas. Is math no longer important? Yes, math is still very important. All of the areas of S&T are very important. It's just that we identify certain things like hypersonics, but quantum science, biotech, and things like that as where we think the applications are going to go, because the department is very use inspired. But I think that there isn't an area of science and technology that we are not interested in. We have a great social science program in the Minerva program, for example, and we are always looking at new and novel ways to use technologies. For example, in biotech, for a long time, the battlefield medical problems that we face and whatnot have been a big focus areas for us. But today we understand that biotech can be used for other things. It can help us with our materials challenges. It can help us with our ability to generate energy and to tackle even climate change. And so, again, all areas of interest are of interest to us. On our website, though, we go through the details of how we analyze individual technology areas. And so maybe that would be helpful to folks who are interested in that.
Absolutely. And we'll be sure and add those to the show notes as well. If people are listening and interested in finding their way to that, we'll make sure and include it. Really, really interesting on a couple different levels. The first one is, as I like to say sometimes, there aren't a lot of careers called mathematician, right? There's some, but not a lot of them. But then you start to think about all these technologies where math manifests itself. And you mentioned several of them: hypersonics, quantum physics, biotech. And just a wide range of disciplines. So for young people, and we do have a lot of young people who listen to this podcast and teachers that use it in their classroom, part of the message there is when you're sitting in your calculus class wondering, when am I going to use this? You use this. I mean, there's opportunities for it. There's huge applications for it, but it's in the application of the technology. Could probably have a whole podcast about how we continue to encourage educators to have those experiential learning opportunities so that students are using what they're learning in a math class and understanding how it applies not just to technology, but applies to a potential career choice. So you mentioned a few really fascinating technologies already. We've talked about artificial intelligence. Again, you mentioned hypersonics just a moment ago. What are some of the emerging technologies, Dr. Honey, that you're particularly focused on at this point in time?
So let me say, I too sat in that calculus class wondering how we were going to.
Right. Didn't we all, right?
We did. And one thing I think is important for students and educators to understand is that, these things do get applied. In DoD, we do have a number of STEM camps that we support across the services where we do try and push that theme and help people understand. We have like 64,000 students attending 460 one-week-long camp sessions, and we're getting people to understand how what they're learning about is going to be applied is very important. But, I think that there are a number of emerging technologies and areas that are going to be of interest. And again, when we look at, folks that are going to work in STEM, it's important to have had that calculus class and to really have your technical skills. It's important to, maintain a sense of creativity. Don't be afraid to experiment and try new things. We're having you do R&D and whatnot to do new things. If we could use a thing that was already on the shelf, we could. But the fact we're going to have to invent new science and new applications, and those kind of attributes will help. But things where I think that we're going to see a lot of work. Everybody is familiar with how wireless has come along, something that seemed impossible not that many years ago to have the proliferation of wireless devices. People will need to communicate. That will be an enduring human need. And so looking at wireless and where we are today, how do we make it better? How do we make it able to work in more environments and meet the needs of people who, are trying to either get videos or sensor networks going? There's just a lot of work, I think, in wireless that will come along. Again, I mentioned biotech. I think it's just, a field that's ready to explode in terms of where it offers opportunities. Quantum science is, something that's been, fascinating a lot of us for many years. Quantum computing gets a lot of press right now. But quantum physics itself and how it may impact sensing, I think, is something that will be of interest to a lot of people. Again, we talked about AI. I think that the large language models and what we've seen come along from that recently with ChatGPT shows a power that, again, many people had hoped to see something like that, but now it's here. And what you'll see, and I think something that students in particular will want to take a look at, is this relationship between advances in microelectronics and software engineering. There's a symbiosis there that's powerful, and it's something that's really worth taking a look at. There was a time several years ago when we all used to buy the next grade of 8086, 286, 386 Pentium processor. Roughly every 18 months, a new processor came out and a new version of Windows, a new version of Word and Office and all that. And so that went on, and then it plateaued. But you're going to see, again, new applications come along as hardware and software become available. And again, out of the microelectronics commons on the DoD side, we see right away there are going to be a lot of great applications coming out. And I think there's a great opportunity in all these areas for students to get engaged and help figure out the future.
Well, and it really speaks to how exciting these careers are going to be in the future. We talk on this podcast a lot about convergences and how various technologies, in my world of manufacturing, you have what we call the IT/OT convergence. So there's no longer a line between the people doing information technology work and work on the manufacturing floor. That those are really, really becoming integrated. And the technologies that you suggest, Dr. Honey, whether it's wireless technology, sensing technology, the innovation in biotech, quantum physics, quantum computing, it's not so much that individual areas are going to revolutionize the world. It's where those converge, I believe, and how we start leveraging them, which really continues to speak to these amazing career opportunities and to having a really broad understanding of a lot of different technologies as we look to the future. So really exciting time to be in STEM. I know that we would 100% agree with that. Two of the technologies or movements, if you will, that I want to drill down a little deeper in are kind of the convergence of digital technology and artificial intelligence, but specifically as to how you do your work, whether it's design, whether it's engineering. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Right now, what you're seeing quite often in the press is a sense among a lot of the public that there's a disruption going on. And they see this convergence of digital technology and artificial intelligence disrupting various elements of society and whatnot. And, it's strange to a lot of us who are engaged in STEM because we don't see it as disrupting. We see it as enabling. And we see it as enabling new applications, new services to help out in solving various problems and whatnot. One thing I would say to anyone who's considering a STEM career, if you're involved in STEM, you're going to be pretty much future-proofed in that these things are not going to surprise you. In many cases, you will have been a part of efforts that, 5 years ago were trying to get to where this thing is doing today. So you're not surprised by it because you've been struggling to get there. But again, we're going to see, I think, in a lot of our work, this convergence give us a lot of new tools because it's been going on for a long time. We just mentioned briefly about this, situation of when Intel brought out a new processor and Microsoft brought out new software and, design packages, graphics tools, a lot of what you see going on in animation, Pixar, and all of the things that, that they were able to do as these tools come along and people get early access to them. And as a STEM, professional, you will have early access. You'll be able to help envision the future and help shape those things because they are going to bring along tools that will enable you to do things. What people are worried about, in many cases, losing jobs and this and that. What we found, I think, historically is that the drudgery in jobs is what goes away. The creativity is what gets emphasized. So I think that will continue in the future.
Yeah, you and I agree 100%. And just kind of watching as what happens as, I love the concept of enabling technologies. And as they, as they come into the workplace, they simultaneously do a few things. First of all, they make us more efficient. There's all kinds of economic ramifications of that efficiency that sometimes get buried in the discussion about are the robots going to take all the jobs, but we become more efficient, we improve our lives. We certainly, there's always a little bit of a displacement of workers as we automate a process. But then the third thing that happens is we create these really, really cool new career opportunities that are oftentimes safer. They're oftentimes more interesting. They oftentimes pay better. We like to say in manufacturing, the closer you get to automation, the more interesting your job is going to become and the better it's going to pay. And who among us doesn't want a more interesting and better paying job? So I love watching technology advance. And I think if you look at it from 30,000 feet, then especially, in the last 40, 50 years or so, but really even going all the way back to maybe the second industrial revolution, you've got these advancements that are disrupting the world in which we work, but creating tremendous opportunities. And I think about the future use and applications of the technologies we're talking about now as doing exactly that. So I just think we live in an amazing and really, really exciting time. And I'll use the term optimism again, really, really optimistic for the future. We've talked about convergences. We've talked about convergences in technologies. We've talked about convergences in the workplace. We'd be interested in maybe some of the convergences across the U.S. government and some of the cross-disciplinary ways that engineers in the Department of Defense get to work with other elements or other departments within the government.
And, I would say for anyone in a STEM career, expect to do exactly that wherever you are as your career progresses and you want to go to a higher level of responsibility. Whether you're at a company, you're going to be expected to be able to work across multiple departments. If you're at a university, you're going to be expected to work with other parts of your department on R&D proposals and work with other universities. So the CHIPS is the great example because in that we are, deeply engaged with all of the planning, source selection activities, all of the things that it takes to make that program work. It is a multi-agency team that comes together, sorts through the issues, debates, and again, reaches a consensus, which is a higher level of understanding from the group of what is the right path forward. But even, at a lower level, you are part of a technology area. You're not alone. You're not an island. There are colleagues working on similar problems elsewhere. So for an example, for a lot of our electro-optical systems, DoD at one time had to make a huge investment into beryllium mirrors. There are a lot of mechanical and optical properties in beryllium mirrors, which made them very attractive for DoD purposes. Turns out when NASA went to design and build the James Webb Telescope, that was the best thing for them to use also. So they were able to leverage not just the infrastructure that we had built up, but the people, the knowledge, the design skills. And so those kinds of opportunities exist. We work collaboratively, a lot with NASA, with the intelligence community, and right now we're working a lot with Commerce and NIST. We worked with NSF routinely for a long time in helping to push areas that we thought were of mutual benefit. And so wherever you are in a STEM career field, as you move along and move up, you're going to want to do that. And it's a great opportunity.
Great opportunity indeed. And I think as we think about that, it really speaks to the types of skills that engineers are going to need in the future. I'd love to hear a little bit as the DoD looks at budding engineers, individuals that are coming out of whether it's an undergrad program or an advanced degree program. What are they thinking about in terms of the types of competencies, skills, and personality traits that are necessary for success?
So, we mentioned, technical skills as being the foundation and being very important. But I would take that one step further, which is that you have to be committed to being a lifelong learner. When I graduated, one of the senior scientists I worked with told a group of us one day that the half-life of what you learned in college is 5 years. Well, that was back then. Today is probably 3 years, maybe 2 years. So you've got to be committed to being a lifelong learner and wanting to build those skills and be able to move in new directions. So it's those skills and being willing to grow them and keep them sharp throughout your career is an important aspect. I think, again, something we touched on already, but I want to reemphasize is a desire to be creative. If you're doing research and development, it's because you want to not just explore the future, you want to create the future. And your vision for how that will be created and what will be done with it and how it will work is important. And there are, I think, few fields where that's just a key element of what you're going to do every day. And I take it maybe for granted a little bit because I'm surrounded by people who do this every day and come and tell me about it. And so I hear about it, but that's another key aspect. The other thing I think, though, is in order to really have a successful career and to really make the most of it, you've got to tie yourself to something that's bigger than just you. So, again, talked about the 60s, the space program, that was a wonderful thing to anchor to. But today, there are many more things. Looking at the use of artificial intelligence into trying to help the medical community make better and faster diagnosis, that's a wonderful thing to be tied to. Climate change, huge problem, and one that could really be an existential threat to humanity if we don't get it under control. So there are any of these things that, people can find their anchor point today, find the anchor point tomorrow. It may change with time, but that's one of the great things about STEM. It does give you the opportunity to meet with other people as a group and bind with those people to tie yourselves to some challenge that is bigger than just yourself and that will be, very rewarding with time.
That's an eminently inspiring answer, and for a couple reasons. The first one is the whole idea of working on something bigger than yourself. At the Tech Ed podcast, every week we say we're securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. It's everything that we do. We wrap everything that we do and every investment we make and the time that we spend around that mission. So doing something that's bigger than yourself, incredibly, incredibly important. And I've learned that over time and would echo that 100 times over. Your whole idea about not just exploring technology, but creating the future. I mean, that's a line for the ages. And when we think about STEM careers and opportunities, it's really what you're doing, right? I mean, if you're doing research, if you're doing important development work, you're creating the future, not just sitting there watching it go by. So I want to turn our discussion now, Dr. Honey, to the whole topic of education partnerships. I know this is something that's really, really important to the Department of Defense. Specifically, I'm interested in learning more about the UARC universities and the work that they do. What can you tell us on that topic?
So the university affiliated research centers, or as we call them, UARCs, a very important partnership with us. As we've covered and talked about during this podcast, we are a STEM-powered enterprise. It's how we exist. It's what we do. It's important for securing the future. And so key to that is our relationship with the universities. And so we do a lot of work with universities in terms of supporting R&D and whatnot. But the UARC is a very special relationship, only with a certain number of universities. It's not something that's widely available, although we have a good number of UARCs. But the UARC itself is a non-profit research organization. And what will distinguish them is that they have a set of core competencies or areas of domain expertise and specialization that is tailored to some long-term need of the department that is best done in a university environment because of the innovation, because of the new students coming through, you get new ideas, the faculty, can devote time and energy to it. The UARCs are a very important aspect to us. Let me just name a couple of them, though,
Awesome,
and give you some idea of what they're doing. So a couple by the Army are particularly interesting. Well, one of the Army UARCs is at the University of California at Santa Barbara, UCSB. And that one is the Institute for Collaborative Biotechnologies.
Yep.
So we talked about biotech and the importance. That's where a lot of the great work is going to come from to help shape the future for us on that. Another one that the Army has is with the University of Southern California, USC, the Institute for Creative Technologies. So, that's very cool. Missile Defense Agency at Utah State has the Space Dynamics Laboratory. And here in R&E, we have one with Stevens Institute on systems engineering. And to us, that's very important because, again, we are the world's largest systems integrator.
Right.
And systems engineering, one of the things that I worry about quite a bit, and I've been worried about for several years, is AI in terms of systems engineering. And are we turning out enough systems engineers with an understanding of AI? We worried about it just for software for a long time as we were moving into these combined digital software weapon systems, but AI takes it to another level.
Sure.
And we rely on the universities to be able to help us sort through these problems and figure out the future.
Yeah, that really sparks the imagination when you think about, applications for artificial intelligence, making sure that our STEM talent is prepared for the world of AI. I will admit that I never thought of, and I love that characterization as well, the Department of Defense is the world's largest systems integrator. That's just a fascinating way to characterize the work that you're doing. The other thing I'd be really fascinated to explore with you, Dr. Honey, in the time we have left is the world of STEM education and our educators that are delivering this just incredible, important learning, and not just delivering the learning, but I would say even more important than that, inspiring that next generation of talent toward careers in STEM, which is going to be so very important to every aspect of our way of life. So can you tell us about what the DoD is doing, perhaps in partnership with educators as they try to bring learning into their STEM classrooms?
We bear a responsibility to help educate and also inspire students to get into STEM and stick with it. One of the folks who used to work for me in this area told me that the key decision point on whether a kid is going to go into STEM or not is actually the 8th grade. That's when they make the decision to go down the path of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Trig, pre-calc, all that. So our future as a STEM-powered country, every year, that decision is in the hands of a group of 8th graders. So
Wow.
they make the right decision each year if we're going to
awesome.
sustain it. So we do, as I mentioned, we have a number of programs, and it's always evolving, always changing, but our support is phenomenal and significant. If you go to the cto.mil webpage, and if you look on the right link, you'll see where those resources are for anyone that's interested in them. The actual website, the link will take you to dodstem.us. But again, on the cto.mil webpage, all of our various programs, K through 12 and beyond, are all listed there. They're very important to us, and we're always improving what we do, and we could use feedback from those that participate, to help make them better.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll make sure that ends up in the show notes as well. I know our educators will be really interested in seeking that opportunity out, bringing this great learning to their students. And I often say that when I hear a great line, I give credit to the individual who said it the first 3 times, and then I outright steal it. And that whole idea that our entire future is in the hands of a bunch of the 8th graders and the decisions they made. Never heard that one before. If that's original, congratulations. That was absolutely fantastic. But I will definitely be using that one in the future. It's been a fascinating episode. We have a couple questions left here, Dr. Honey. Before we get into the final question, and you've mentioned a few resources already, other places that our audience should go that we can link up in the show notes in terms of learning more about the conversation that we've had.
There's one that I want to point out because a lot of the folks who are perhaps listening in may already be in an entrepreneurial phase of their lives. Could be as a researcher who's already out in the lab somewhere, could be a high school student, junior high school student, whatever. But if you go to our cto.mil webpage, there's one that I specifically want to call attention to. There's a link up on the right. It says work with us. If you go to that, there's a very special webpage called Innovation Pathways. And I will just say that is a gold mine. If you have any entrepreneurial interests at all, you're looking to do work with the federal with DoD, go to that link and follow that one forever, because it will give you a lot of insights on opportunities you otherwise would never know about.
That's a great suggestion, and I love it. We're going to close our time out with Dr. David Honey. One last question. We love asking this question of our guests. We get so many fascinating answers, and that is, if you were to go back in time, Dr. Honey, and give one piece of advice to the 15-year-old version of yourself, maybe a couple years after you made that really important decision that's going to change the future in 8th grade, if you could go back to that 15-year-old young person and give them one piece of advice, what would that be?
So, this actually something that comes up for debate in our office, that question. And our director of strategic communications, who's a retired Marine, has told me I should go back and tell my 15-year-old self to join the Marine Corps rather than the Air Force. But I enjoyed pilot training and everything the Air Force did. So I think I would still advise him to go. But, I would say back at that time, for any kid, even today, there's this, concern is STEM going to help me? Is it really going to be something there? And I would go back and tell my 50-year-old self, yes, stick with it. It really will pay off. No one can predict the future, but a STEM career absolutely helps you prepare for it. So that's the advice I would give.
Stick with the STEM career. That is phenomenal advice for any young person. It's obviously paid off in incredible ways for you, Dr. David Honey, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering for the United States Department of Defense. This has been just a phenomenal conversation. You're incredibly insightful, incredibly knowledgeable. I learned a ton, and I can't thank you enough for taking some time for us on the Tech Ed podcast.
Thank you for the chance to talk with you today. I greatly appreciate it, and good luck. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.